Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins in the elder days of Middle-earth, before the great dragon Smaug took the lonely mountain, and before songs of Thor and Oakenshield were ever sung. There lived three proud Dwarven clans, the Longbeards, the Firebeards, and the Broadbeams. Each clan had carved their kingdoms into the bones of the world, delving deep into the roots of the mountains, where stone spoke secrets and gold gleamed like stars caught in the dark. But in those days, the dwarves were a broken people. Their realms, once mighty and connected, had become isolated and suspicious of one another. Long roads that had once run bright with the rift of many feet had fallen into darkness. Gates had closed, bridges had crumbled, and kin had become little more than legend to each other. It was in the twilight of this age that a whisper stirred. An old tale, half forgotten by the lore masters, and sung only by the bravest minstrels by firelight. It spoke of a hidden path, the Gate of Three Hammers, deep beneath the gray mountains. It was said that this ancient gate, built in the time of Duran's sons, connected the strongholds of the three clans with secret, enduring roads. Roads wide enough for armies to march safe from the eyes of dragons and the armies of men. But the gate had been lost for generations, its location swallowed by the shifting stones and time's slow hand. Only hints remained. A carved stone here, a broken rune there, whispers buried beneath layers of forgetfulness. Among the dwarves, still burning with pride and longing, were three leaders, each heavy with the weight of his people's hopes. Grow, Lord of the Longbeards, tall for his kind and fierce-eyed, whose halls beneath the iron hills echoed hollow for lack of voices. Charoon, chieftain of the Firebeards, red-haired and stout-hearted, whose people clung stubbornly to the mountains of Lewin, mining thin veins of silver. And Bavor, master of the Broadbeams, a grim but cunning lord whose folk had retreated into the shadowy places of the gray mountains. Ever watchful and silent, each of them heard the old tales. Each knew that if the gate could be found, if the roads could be reopened, the broken clans might be one people again. Trade would flourish, chin would greet chin, and the strength of the dwarves might rise once more against the encroaching darkness of the world. Yet old grudges die hard. Pride had grown like iron walls between the clans, each suspicious of the other, each blaming ancient betrayals whispered in half-truths and memories worn thin by the passing of years. Still a council was called under the light of a cold winter moon in a cavern carved out of black marble. The three leaders gathered. Their retainers, grim and silent, stood back while the lords spoke. The cavern, long forgotten, bore an ancient carving upon its far wall. Three hammers crossed and bound by a single chain. Thee spoke first, his voice deep as the mines themselves. If the tales be true, then we sit upon the bones of our father's greatness. I would see it restored, though it cost me dear. Darren nodded, his fierce eyes flashing in the torchlight. I would mind the stars themselves to see my people thrive again. Bavu remained silent for a long moment, his eyes unreadable beneath his heavy brow. Then, with a gruff grunt, he said, "Words are wind. Action will prove the truth." Thus was the pact made. The three leaders would venture together into the deeps of the gray mountains, seeking the Gate of Three Hammers. None would bring armies. Only their closest kin and loyal companions would tread the ancient paths, for too great a force might awaken darker things slumbering beneath the stone. And so it was that preparations began. Roar brought with him Balin, a young but wise Longbeard, whose lineage traced back to Balin the Elder, and one, a miner skilled in reading the language of stone. Darin brought Gnarly, a smith of great renown, and Thalin, a singer whose voice could coax memory from the walls themselves. Devor brought Dole, his silent cousin, known for his uncanny ability to find hidden doors, and Freeze, a battle-hardened shield maiden whose axe had tasted orc blood more times than she could count. Before they set out, each leader knelt before an ancient altar, weathered and cracked, but still bearing the sigil of the three hammers, and swore by stone and steel that he would not raise arms against the others, no matter what trials might come. They knew not what awaited them in the forgotten halls. The tales spoke of traps left by the old masters, guardians forged not of flesh, but of iron and ancient craft. Devices that had not seen the light of sun or star for an age, but which might yet awaken at the touch of a careless hand. Still they pressed on, for the hope of their people burned hotter than fear. The first leg of their journey took them through broken tunnels and abandoned halls, where the dust lay so thick that each step raised silent ghosts from the floor. They passed statues of dwarf kings, whose names none remembered, their faces crumbled by time, but their crowns still proud upon their brows. They crossed bridges of stone over chasms so deep that even a dwarf's keen eyes could not pierce the darkness below. For days they marched, torches flickering like will-o'-the-wisps in the endless black. And all the while the feeling grew. They were being watched. One night, as the company camped in a cavern filled with the petrified remains of long-dead mushrooms, Balin spoke. "Have you not noticed it?" he whispered. "The tunnels are changing." "What mean you?" asked Gror, his hand resting on the haft of his axe. "The paths behind us?" Balin glanced over his shoulder. "They are not the same. I marked them. The stones are moving." A shiver passed through the camp. Even the bravest among them tightened their cloaks around their shoulders and spoke in lower tones. For in the deep places of the world, stone has a memory, and sometimes it remembers how to hate. Yet there was no turning back. The gate lay ahead, or so they hoped, and with each step the weight of their purpose pressed heavier upon them. Ahead loomed the first of many trials, a doorway, vast and sealed, without handle or hinge, bearing the ancient runes of all three clans. It was here that their true test would begin. The doorway rose before them, a black monolith wrought of iron and stone, so seamlessly joined that no crack could be seen by eye or finger. It stood silent and immovable, its face adorned with ancient runes etched deep and strong, though time had worn them dim. Twisting vines of forgotten craftwork wove between the symbols, and above all, 3 mighty hammers were carved, each differing slightly in form, yet entwined by a single circle that bound them together. No keyhole marred the surface, no latch or lever gave hint to its opening. It was a wall of certainty built against the world itself. The company halted at the threshold, and for a time none spoke. The air grew heavy in their lungs, and the torches sputtered with a sudden unease, as though the very breath of the place resisted their coming. Grow stepped forward, his heavy boots striking the stone with a sound that echoed long and low into the unseen hollows beyond. He placed his hand upon the cold surface and frowned, tracing the runes with a reverent finger. The script was of the Elder tongue, a language that even among the wise had become a riddle, for it spoke in the idioms of a world whose heart had grown old and strange. Boran drew near, his sharp eyes reading alongside Gror's careful touch, while Beor stood somewhat apart, his brow furrowed deep in thought, his hand never straying far from the hilt of his axe. The others of their company remained back, their murmured counsels falling into uneasy silence, for all could feel the presence that lingered unseen in that place. A memory of hands long dead, of purposes older than the wars of men. At last Gro spoke, and his voice was low but clear. Here it is written, "Only with the hands of the three and the heart of one shall a gate be opened." Thought enfrowned, his beard twitching as he mouthed the words anew. A riddle, no doubt, but not without purpose. Three must act, yet one must lead. Bor grunted, his voice rough as he stepped forward to stand before the gate. Words woven by craftsmen who trusted no stranger. It shall not open by the strength of arms alone. They set to their task, each leader placing a hand upon the carved hammers, feeling the deep cold of the stone seep into their flesh. At first, nothing stirred. The gate remained unmoved, indifferent to their presence. They pressed, turned, even sang soft snatches of ancient songs of forging, hoping to awaken whatever spirit had been bound into the mechanism. Yet the stone gave no answer, and the darkness about them seemed to lean closer, as if it watched with patient disdain. The hours stretched long, marked only by the slow guttering of their torches. Weariness crept into their limbs, but none would admit defeat. For to fail here would mean not only the loss of the gate, but also the breaking of the fragile hope that bound the clans together. Pride and duty waged war within them. It was Balin who, sitting silently near the edge of the torchlight, first saw the pattern hidden among the carvings. Rising, he approached with careful steps, bowing his head respectfully before speaking. "Lords, hear me," he said, and though young, his voice carried the weight of old wisdom. "The hammers are not merely symbols. They are the keys themselves. Look, each is fashioned in the likeness of a clan's mark. The Longbeards, the Firebeards, and the Broadbeams. But they must not be touched alone, nor at random." Gror turned his keen eyes to the carvings anew, and he saw now what had been hidden before. Subtle marks around each hammer, traces of wear that suggested emotion, a dance of hands and strength combined. "We must strike them together," Gro said, his voice steady with newfound certainty. Each lower lorded his own hammer, and at once, as one, there was a moment's silence, heavy with import. And then the three leaders took their places before the gate. Gror at the hammer of the Longbeards, broad and solid, shaped like a mountain's root. Darren at the Firebeards' mark, flame-tonged and sharp. Bor at the Broadbeams' emblem, heavy and square as a fortress wall. They raised their fists in unison, their companions holding their breath behind them, and with a single nod from Roar, they struck. A sound rang out, clear and pure, like the peal of a silver bell heard across a vast chasm. The stone shuddered beneath their feet, and the carvings began to glow with a faint light, as if the very memory of the ancient smiths had stirred within the rock. Slowly, ponderously, the great gate began to divide, splitting along lines so fine they might have been woven by spider silk. A deep sigh, as of long-held breath, swept through the cavern as the ancient seals broke, and the way beyond was revealed. A narrow stair, steep and winding, led downward into shadow deeper than any torch could pierce. Faint gusts of stale air whispered from the depths, carrying with them scents of rust and dust, of old battles fought and long forgotten. The company hesitated upon the threshold, for though the gate had opened, the path beyond was fraught with unseen perils. No dwarf among them doubted that the builders of the gate had laid further trials within, guardians that cared not for the blood of kin nor the passage of time. Still, Grow stepped forward without fear, planting his heavy boot upon the first stair. He turned back to his companions, his face set with grim determination. "Our fathers trusted to craft and cunning to shield their works from enemies and fools alike," he said. "We are neither. Let us prove ourselves worthy of their trust." One by one the others followed, their torches casting long, flickering shadows against the walls of the passage. The doorway closed behind them with a sound like a mountain settling into its bed, and the outer world was lost to sight. Thus they descended into the ancient deeps, where few had walked since the world was young, and where peril and promise lay tangled like roots in the dark earth. Their journey had truly begun, and each step would test not only their strength of arm, but the strength of their hearts as well. For the Gate of Three Hammers was not merely a passage, it was a forge, and they were the iron yet to be tempered. The stair wound downward in tight spirals, so narrow that they were forced to march single file, the stone walls pressing close on either side, and the ceiling often so low that the taller among them must stoop their heads. Their torches cast long shadows that danced and fled before them, and the air grew colder with every step, heavy with the scent of old earth and iron. No sound met their ears save the scuff of boots upon stone and the faint drip of unseen waters far below. Hours passed, or perhaps days. It was impossible to reckon the time in that eternal darkness. And still the stair went on, sometimes breaking into brief landings where the stone bore the marks of ancient hands, faded carvings of hammers and anvils, sigils of forgotten houses, and once a relief showing three crowned dwarf lords standing side by side, their hammers raised in solemn oath. The sight stirred a fire in their hearts, and for a little while the weariness fell from their limbs, and they marched with renewed strength, their hearts beating in time to the silent song of their people's glory. At length the stair ended in a wide hall, its roof supported by vast pillars carved into the likeness of trees, their stone branches intertwining overhead in a frozen canopy. The walls were lined with niches where ancient torches once burned, though now only blackened stumps remained, and the floor was a mosaic of colored stones worn smooth by the passage of forgotten years. At the far end of the hall stood another door, though smaller than the first, and above it was set a great wheel fashioned of bronze and silver, its surface inlaid with runes that glimmered faintly in the torchlight. Here they halted to take their counsel, for it was plain that some mechanism governed the door's opening, and no common key would serve. Roar approached the wheel, studying it with the keen gaze of a craftsman born. He traced the runes with a calloused hand, murmuring their meaning to himself, while Darren and Bavore stood watchful at his side. "The runes speak of trials," Grow said at last, his voice low and measured. "3 tasks must be accomplished to pass. Each task was set by one of the clans that none might enter who was not of true dwarven heart and hand." "And if we fail?" asked Darren, his eyes narrowing. Roar did not answer, but the grim set of his mouth spoke plainly enough. They knew, as all dwarves know, that their forefathers trusted not to mercy when they laid their treasures to rest. After brief deliberation, it was agreed that they would face the trials together, for the runes warned that those who sought to pass alone would find only death. Thus they prepared themselves, tightening the straps of their armor, testing the edges of their axes, and whispering prayers to Mahal, the maker of the dwarves, whose hammer rang still in the deep places of the world. Gror placed his hand upon the wheel and turned it with a great effort. A deep grinding noise echoed through the hall, and the ground beneath them trembled slightly, as if something ancient had been roused from long slumber. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow passageway lined with statues of dwarf warriors, their faces stern and unforgiving, their axes raised in silent warning. The company entered, their torches casting flickering light upon the grim sentinels, and after a short distance the passage widened into a great chamber, circular and domed, with 3 archways leading off into darkness. In the center of the floor, set within a ring of gold, was a pedestal of stone, upon which rested a small anvil rod of black iron, and beside it a hammer of shining mithril, light as a feather to the eye, yet heavy with an unseen weight. Around the pedestal, an inscription, circled in flowing script, and Gore, stooping low, read it aloud. To forge anew what was broken, to mend what was sundered, the first must prove the craftsman's hand, shape the true key, or awaken the guardian who hungers for unworthy blood. A silence fell upon the company as the meaning of the words settled upon them like a cold mist. The first trial was of craft, an ordeal of forging in which their skill and memory of the old ways would be tested. Drawn stepped forward without hesitation, for among them he was the greatest smith, his skill famed even beyond the halls of his people. He knelt before the pedestal, lifting the mithril hammer with reverent hands, and inspected the anvil with a craftsman's eye. Set beside the anvil, hidden within a small depression in the floor, was a cache of raw materials, shards of adamantine, veins of silver and steel, and fragments of gemstone, rough and uncut. The task was plain. From these must be fashioned a key. Though none could say what form it must take, the company withdrew to the edges of the chamber, leaving Darren to his work. For it was a law among the dwarves that no smith shall be watched while he labors upon a work of great import. Even Berlin, whose heart ached with curiosity, held his tongue. Darren set to his task, his face alight with a fierce joy, for here was a challenge worthy of his blood and training. He sorted the materials with swift, sure hands, his mind already shaping possibilities, seeking the secret pattern that lay hidden among them. The mithril hammer struck the black anvil with a ringing sound, clear and bright, and all who heard it felt their hearts lift as though a light unseen stirred within the stone. Long he labored, and the air grew thick with the scent of hot metal and the sweat of honest toil. Sparks flew like fireflies dancing in the gloom, and the echoes of the hammer blows were a strange music that seemed to stir the very bones of the earth. At times, Duran paused, staring into the flame of his small forge with eyes that saw beyond sight, seeking the memory of ancient shapes and the wisdom of hands long stilled. Then he would hammer anew, his blows sure and measured, each one a note in a song older than the mountains themselves. At last, after what seemed both a lifetime and the blink of an eye, Darren lifted the finished work into the torchlight. It was a key, but unlike any they had ever seen, wrought of mingled metals, its teeth intricate and cunning, its shank inlaid with the ruins of the 3 clans, and its bow shaped like a crown encircling a hammer. Darn placed the key upon the anvil with a sigh and stepped back, weary but proud. Roar came forward, and lifting the key in both hands, he turned to the 3 archways that gaped like open mouths before them. Upon the keystone of each arch a lock was set, one of gold, one of iron, and one of stone. Without hesitation, Grow approached the iron arch and set the key within its lock. For a long moment, nothing stirred. Then a deep, sonorous chime filled the chamber, and the iron arch swung open, revealing a stair descending yet deeper into the earth, lit by a faint and ghostly glow. The Urzit trial was past, yet as they gathered their torches and prepared to descend, a sound like distant thunder reached their ears, and the statues that lined the passage began to stir, dust falling from their shoulders like the ashes of forgotten fires. The Guardians had awakened, and the next trial would not be one of craft, but of courage and steel. The first murmurs of stone grinding against stone reached their ears like a whisper of doom, low and terrible. And before their torches, the statues that had stood in silent vigil now moved, their eyes glowing with a dim, baleful light, their ancient axes rising with a slowness more dreadful than the rush of a charging foe. Each figure carved in the likeness of the dwarf kings of old bore upon its breast the sigil of a clan long fallen into memory. And as the companions stood frozen, the realization gripped them with iron fingers. These were not merely statues, but wardens wrought by the greatest arts of the elder smiths, imbued with a semblance of life and will. Guardians who cared not for the blood that ran in the veins of those before them, but only for the charge entrusted to them through the long ages. Grow, quick of thought and strong of heart, was the first to break the spell of dread that had fallen upon the company. With a great shout, he raised his axe aloft, the polished steel catching the flicker of torchlight, and called to the others to form a ring. For in close ranks alone could they hope to withstand the onslaught that even now gathered momentum like an avalanche beginning its fall. Of 4, and Darn leapt to his side without hesitation, their companions swiftly drawing blades and hefting shields, forming a circle of steel and stone-hearted will about the pedestal where the key had been forged. The first of the Guardians moved with a grinding slowness, but with a strength that promised death in a single blow. A massive axe, pitted by centuries, yet keen as a winter's chill, swept towards them, and it was only by a swift sidestep that Balin avoided the stroke, his own axe flashing and riposte to strike sparks against the Guardian's thigh. Yet where the blade bit, no blood flowed, only a dull clangor as if striking the hull of a mighty ship, and Balin staggered back, his face grim, knowing that no common weapon would bring these sentinels low. Then, swift of wit and keen of eye, called out over the clamor, pointing to the joints of the statues, where stone met stone with less certainty, where time and craft had left their subtlest weaknesses. "Strike the joints!" he cried, his voice cutting through the den like a clarion. And at once the companions altered their blows, seeking the scenes at the elbows, the knees, the necks. The battle that followed was a grim and wearying affair. For the Guardians, though slow, fought with a relentless might, each swing of their weapons shaking the very ground and shattering chips of stone from the pillars around them. Time seemed to stretch into endless moments of straining muscles, gasping breath, and ringing steel. As the companions fought not for glory nor for gold, but for the simple right to take the next breath, to place the next foot upon the path their hearts had set them. Dress, whose axe had tasted orc flesh upon many fields, was a whirlwind of fury, ducking beneath the sweep of a hammer that would have crushed a lesser warrior flat, and driving her blade into the back of a guardian's knee with a roar of triumph. The great statue buckled and fell with a crash that shook dust from the high vaults. But even as it crumbled, another loomed on to take its place, implacable and unswerving. One, though older and less swift, fought with the grim tenacity of a mountain enduring a storm. His shield raised high to turn aside a blow that would have felled a horse, his axe finding its mark again and again, wearing down the inhuman strength of his foe. Through it all, Grow, Doctor, and Bavor fought at the center, their backs to one another, their blows falling in a steady rhythm like the beating of a mighty heart. Old grievances and rivalries fell away like leaves in a storm. Here in the forge of battle, only brotherhood remained. At last, when it seemed their strength must surely fail, and the guardians pressed them down into death and silence, a strange thing came to pass. From the darkness beyond the archway of iron, a wind rose. Not a wind of the world above, fresh with the scent of grass and open skies, but a wind of the deeps, dry and cold and heavy with the dust of ages. It swept through the chamber, snuffing out half their torches in a heartbeat. And with it came a voice not heard with the ears, but felt in the marrow of their bones. A voice like the crack of stones splitting, like the deep, slow music of the earth itself. "The trial is past," the voice said, and the guardians froze mid-strike, their weapons raised yet unmoving, their glowing eyes dimming like coals grown cold. Slowly, one by one, the statues sank back into stillness, the light fading from their forms, and at last they stood as they had before, mere stone once more, their charge fulfilled. For a long time the companions remained where they were, their breath harsh in their throats, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. Then Grow straightened, his face pale but fierce, and looked to the stair descending through the iron arc. "There lies our road," he said, his voice but steady. "No less perilous than before, I deem, but open to us now by right and by valor." Silently they gathered their torches, relit those that had been lost, and tended to their wounds as best they could. Few words were spoken, for in the deep places of the world, it is unwise to shout one's victory into the listening dark. Down the stair they went, deeper into the heart of the mountain, where no living thing had trod for 1,000 years and more. The walls around them bore carvings of wondrous skill, scenes of forging and feasting, of battles fought and pacts sworn. Here and there the gold and gemstone inlay still caught the torchlight and threw it back in 1,000 shattered glimmers, a mute testimony to the glory of a time when the dwarves ruled beneath the mountains. Unconquered and unafraid, yet amid the beauty lurked signs of decay and desolation. Great cracks riven through the stone, heaps of rubble where the earth had trembled and shaken in its slow, patient rage. More than once they had to pick their way carefully around chasms that split the very floor, narrow but deep and blacker than the night outside the mountains. Still they pressed on, driven by hope and the iron will that had ever been the dwarfs' greatest treasure. At last, after what seemed an endless descent, they came to another hall greater even than the one above. Here the roof soared so high that their torches could not pierce the shadowed vaults, and the pillars were carved into the forms of giants, bearded and crowned, who gazed down with solemn, inscrutable faces. In the center of the hall stood a dais of black stone, upon which rested a great mechanism, a wheel of gears and levers, cunningly wrought of iron and gold, so intricate that it seemed more a thing of magic than of craft. Around its base, 3 great sockets were set, each one carved with the sigil of a clan. the Longbeards, the Firebeards, and the Broadbeams. Here they knew lay the second trial, and here too the shadows stirred. The company stood in silence before the dais, the faint sputtering of their torches casting uncertain light over the vast, silent machinery that loomed before them. And for a time, none dared move or speak, for the air was heavy with the presence of old and potent craft, a power wrought not by spell or enchantment, but by the long, patient toil of hands that knew the secret language of stone and metal. The mechanism was a marvel, a great interlocking dance of wheels and levers, so cunningly fashioned that it seemed to pulse with a life of its own, each piece a perfect answer to the other. And upon each of the 3 sockets at its base were graven the names of the clans in the runes of the Elder Speech, now half faded and worn by the dust of forgotten centuries. Grow approached first, his boots sounding hollow upon the stone floor, and knelt before the nearest socket, the rune of the Longbeards gleaming faintly beneath the grime of ages. He brushed away the dust with a reverent hand and traced the carved letters, his brow furrowed deep in thought. Before and joined him, each studying the socket marked for his own clan, their faces grave and intent. For it was plain that here some action must be taken, some test endured. Yet the nature of the trial was cloaked in mystery. As they pondered, Balin, ever watchful, spoke in a low voice. "Look to the walls, lords," he said. And they turned their eyes to the dim spaces beyond the dais, where faint carvings could be seen, worn, but not wholly lost. The torchlight revealed scenes of 3 dwarves, each bearing a hammer, each standing before a wheel much like this one, each setting into the sockets a token, a gem, a piece of metal, and a shard of stone, each shaped and worked to a form most precise. The meaning grew clear to them, though it was no simple task that was laid before them. Each clan must offer a piece of its own making, a token wrought with the skill and spirit of their people, fitted perfectly to its place. Without all 3, the mechanism would not stir. Without unity of purpose, the gate would remain shut. And worse, it was likely that some ancient doom had been woven into the machinery, set to awaken against those who failed the test. For a moment, a deep weariness settled upon them, for they had brought no such tokens with them, no treasures wrought for this purpose. Nor could such things be fashioned hastily, for the offering demanded not merely craft, but meaning, a truth drawn from the very heart of the clan's heritage. But where others might have faltered, the dwarfs of old blood found resolve. Grow spoke first, his voice as steady as the bedrock beneath the mountain. "We have within us the lore and the memory of our fathers. Let each of us now fashion the token from what we bear. For we carry with us not only axe and shield, but the very spirit of our kind." And so they set to work, each withdrawing from his belongings the choicest piece of material he bore. Grow took from his pack a lump of black iron mined from the roots of the iron hills, dense and pure beyond common measure. Darren produced a gleaming vein of silver drawn from the hidden mines of the Blue Mountains, its sheen soft as moonlight on water. Avor, after some deliberation, revealed a stone rough-hewn and unremarkable to the untrained eye. But to those who knew, it was a fragment of black marble from the ancient halls of Nogrod, veined with threads of white like the first snow upon dark earth. These materials spoke of their people's pride and history, and with these tokens they turned to the forge that stood nearby, a relic of ancient craft still intact, though its bellows were stiff with disuse and its hearth long cold. Ilan and Gnarly, skilled in the ways of fire and anvil, labored to awaken the forge, coaxing flame from stubborn embers, fanning it with careful breath until a low, steady fire took hold, and the forge glowed once more with the living heat of old. Roar, first among them, places iron upon the anvil, and with patient blows of his hammer, shaped it into a disc engraved with the mountain sigil of the Longbeards, a symbol of endurance and steadfastness, polished until it shone with a dark, somber gleam. Next came Darren, whose hands, though wearied by the long road, lost none of their deftness as he worked the silver into a slender spiral, a coil that symbolized the unbroken spirit of his folk, catching the torchlight in 100 gleaming reflections. Last was Bor, grim and silent, who chipped and carved the black marble with a chisel of fine steel, shaping it into a shard with sharp, clean lines, a simple form that spoke of strength without ornament, of silent endurance beneath weight uncounted. At last, the three tokens lay side by side, their surfaces catching the forge's red glow, and for a moment, all were silent, honoring the labor and the meaning bound into each creation. With solemn ceremony, each lord took his token and approached the dais. Gror placed the iron disc into the socket of the Longbeards, and it settled into place with a satisfying click, the mechanism beneath it stirring faintly like a slumbering beast turning in its dreams. Drain set the silver spiral into the socket of the Firebeards, and the wheel gave a shudder as if it drank in the offering. Ah! Bor stepped forward last, his face grave as he pressed the shard of black marble into the socket of the Broadbeams. And when he did so, a deep sound, like the tolling of a bell, reverberated through the hall. The wheel began to turn slowly at first, then with gathering speed, and the gears meshed with a music of grinding stone and chiming metal, a harmony rough and beautiful beyond the crafting of elves or men. The dais trembled, and a great shaft of light, cold and white as starlight, burst from the center of the mechanism, striking the vaulted ceiling far above and scattering the shadows like fleeing wolves. With a final shudder, the ground beneath them shifted, and a new stair, broad and carved with the sigils of all three clans, opened before them, leading downward into a tunnel vast and dark, its mouth yawning like a throat that had not tasted air for 1,000 years. Their second trial had been overcome, but the road ahead was long yet, and perilous beyond their imagining. And each dwarf knew in his heart that the greatest test still awaited them beyond the threshold of the earth. And in that moment, though none dared speak it aloud, each felt a stirring of hope, faint but steady, as though the spirits of their forefathers watched and whispered blessings from the halls of stone beyond the world. Without delay, they gathered their gear, reforged their resolve, and stepped into the waiting dark. Their hearts bound by the oath they had sworn, their steps measured by the rhythm of the forge and the stone. Thus they passed into the deep ways beyond the second trial, where the true heart of the Gate of Three Hammers lay hidden still. The tunnel into which they now descended was unlike the passages they had trodden before, where those had been rough with time's wear and ruin. This was a road of deliberate making, vast and solemn, hung with such skill that even after uncounted years it remained unmarred by the tremors of the earth or the slow gnawing of water and time. The walls were set with vast panels of black stone, veined with threads of silver and gold that shimmered faintly in the torchlight, and upon them were carved scenes of the forging of the gate itself, and of the lords of the three clans who had bound their works together by oath and by blood. Their faces, worn yet proud, gazed down upon the company as they passed, And the companions moved with lowered voices and solemn steps, as though treading through a house of kings, long dead, yet still mighty in spirit. The road wound deeper, the air growing colder and heavier, and a sense of immense weight pressed down upon them, as if the very mountains above bent their gaze upon these few intruders, testing their courage. No sound save their footfalls disturbed the silence. A silence so deep that each strike of boot on stone seemed to ring out like a hammerfall. The torches guttered in the unseen currents of the deep places, and now and again a faint whisper seemed to flit past their ears. No voice they could name, yet too sure to be mere fancy. At length the passage widened into a cavern vast beyond reckoning, its roof lost in shadow, and its far walls hidden beyond the reach of their feeble lights. In the heart of this cavern stood a structure unlike any they had yet seen, a great gatehouse of black iron and stone, crowned with towers that leaned out over the abyss that yawned before it. A chasm so wide and deep that even the keenest eye among them could not discern its bottom. A single bridge, narrow and arching, spanned the gulf, but it was broken midway, the stones fallen long ago into the darkness below. A silence heavier than before fell upon them, for the way was barred, and the gate lay beyond their reach, gleaming faintly across the chasm like a star glimpsed through storm clouds. Yet Grow, undaunted, stepped forward to the edge of the broken bridge, his brow furrowed deep in thought. "There must be another way," he said, more to himself than to the others. And he turned his gaze back upon the gatehouse, seeking any sign, any hint left by the builders for those who might come after. It was Bon, ever sharp of eye and mind, who at last pointed to a narrow stair carved into the very rock of the cavern wall, winding down along the edge of the abyss like a thread laid by a cautious hand. "There," he said, and all eyes turned to see the perilous path he had marked. It was narrow indeed, scarcely wide enough for a dwarf to pass without brushing the wall, and in many places it crumbled away into nothingness, leaving only the black void beyond. Doran stepped to Grow's side and laid a hand upon his shoulder. "It is a path for the desperate," he said, his voice low. "But I see no other before us, and desperate we are," Babor added grimly, tightening the strap of his shield across his back. "If we turn back now, all that we have endured shall be for naught." So it was that, after a brief council, they set out upon the narrow stair, each stepping with the utmost care, their hands pressed against the rough wall, their torches held high to light the way. The stone beneath their feet was slick with the damp breath of the deep earth, and more than once a slip or a stumble sent pebbles clattering into the abyss. The sound of their fall swallowed swiftly by the dark. For a time that seemed endless, they crept along the treacherous path, their hearts hammering in their breasts, their eyes fixed upon each careful step. None spoke, for even a whisper might break their concentration and hurl them into the waiting gulf. Sweat ran down their faces despite the cold, and their muscles ached with the strain of holding themselves so rigid. Yet they pressed on, and at last the path widened, leading them to a ledge that ran along the cavern wall, and from there to a hidden door set into the base of the gatehouse. It was a small door, wrought of heavy iron, and locked fast with a mechanism of wheels and levers. Yet no enchantment lay upon it, and with patient skill, Dog-Eor's silent kinsman worked the locks until the bolts slid back with a sound like the sigh of an ancient sleeper. They slipped through into a narrow hall, lit by the dying embers of long-forgotten lanterns, and found themselves within the foundations of the gatehouse. The air was thick with dust, and the silence here was of a different kind, less oppressive, yet filled with the sense of waiting, as though the stones themselves remembered the purpose for which they had been shaped. The hall led to a great chamber, its roof upheld by pillars carved in the likeness of mighty dwarves bearing the weight of the mountain upon their shoulders. In the center of the chamber stood a dais of black stone, and upon it a device of intricate make. 3 levers, each set within a bronze framework of runes and symbols, each marked with a sigil of one of the clan. It was plain to all that here was the final mechanism, the last safeguard before the gate itself would open. Roar, Dreth, and Bavor approached the dais, their faces set and resolute, and stood before the levers. Yet even as they did so, a deep rumbling stirred the ground beneath their feet, and from the shadows beyond the pillars there came a sound of grinding stone and clashing metal, a sound they knew too well. From the darkness emerged a figure of dread, a guardian wrought of iron and gold, fashioned in the form of a dwarf, but thrice the height of any living man, its eyes burning with a cold, fierce light. In its hands it bore a hammer and an axe, each larger than a wagon, and as it stepped forward, the ground trembled beneath its weight. It was the final warden of the gate, left by the smiths of old to guard against any who sought entry without the rightful tokens and oaths. No words would turn this guardian aside. No parley would avail them here. With a roar that shook the pillars, the Iron Warden raised its hammer high, and the last trial began. The great Iron Warden strode forward, each step sending shivers through the stone beneath their feet. And for a moment, the companions stood as if rooted, their hearts weighed down by the sheer might and terror of the thing. Never had they seen its like before, for it was not a creature of flesh, nor wholly of sorcery, but a masterpiece of cunning craft, imbued with a will unyielding, bound to its ancient charge beyond all reckoning of time. Its surface gleamed in the wavering light of their torches, a patchwork of gold filigree and blackened steel. Its limbs formed of interlocking plates that shifted and groaned with every ponderous movement. And its face, though fashioned in the likeness of a dwarf, was devoid of any spark of mercy or thought, a mask of relentless judgment wrought in iron. Gror was the first to raise his voice, shouting commands to his comrades, his own fear mastered by the iron will that had been tempered in the long hardship of his people. "Scatter!" he cried, his axe already in his hand, the runes upon its blade catching the torchlight in glimmers of cold fire. "Do not meet its blows head-on! Strike at its joints! Bring it low!" At his words, the dwarves sprang into action, each moving with a swiftness born of desperation and discipline, spreading out across the chamber to draw the Guardian's attention and divide its fury. Frizz, fleet, floated, and fearless, darted to the left, her shield high to ward against any stray blow, while Balin and Dole circled to the right, their axes gleaming in their hands. Bavor and Drawn remained near the levers, ready to act should a moment's respite be won, while Grow himself led the attack, a bulwark of strength and determination. The Warden's hammer came down with a force that would have shattered a house of stone. But Grow leapt aside with the agility of a younger warrior, the massive head crashing into the floor where he had stood, sending a shower of sparks and chips of stone flying through the air. Seizing the opening, Balin and Dog rushed forward, striking at the joints of the Guardian's legs, their axes biting deep, yet finding themselves rebounded by the stubborn, tempered iron, which yielded only grudgingly, even to the finest blades. The battle raged in the gloom, the clangor of steel against iron filling the chamber with a deafening din, and the ground trembled with the Guardian's wrath. Again and again it struck, sweeping its hammer and axe with deadly precision, forcing the companions to scatter and regroup. Each breath, a hard one, victory against the relentless force of their foe. Driz, finding a vantage near one of the pillars, called out to Balin, pointing to a place where the plating along the warden's side gaped slightly with each swing of its hammer. "There," she cried. "Strike when it swings." Balin, understanding her meaning, nodded sharply and waited, crouched low behind his shield. As the guardian swung once more at Gror, missing by a hair's breadth, Balin rushed in with a mighty roar, driving his axe into the exposed seam with all the strength he could muster. The blade sank deep, and a gout of sparks flew forth, accompanied by a groaning sound from within the warden's frame, as if some ancient mechanism had been wounded. Yet the victory was partial at best, for the guardian turned upon Balin with his speed belying its massive form, and only Free's timely shield block diverted a crushing blow that might have ended the young warrior's life. Together they fell back, battered but alive, while Gro seized the opportunity to rally the others. Bavel, grim and silent, struck next, his own heavy hammer smashing into the same wounded joint with a blow that reverberated through the chamber. A deep crack appeared along the guardian's side, and it staggered for the first time, a great grinding noise issuing from within its chest. "Now," Gro shouted, his voice with exertion while it falters. The companions hurled themselves at the warden with renewed fury, axes rising and falling in a ceaseless rhythm, hammers crashing against weakened joints, swords finding purchase where once only steel had turned them aside. Blow by blow they wore it down, though at great cost, for Oin was struck a glancing blow that sent him sprawling, and Thalin's shield was torn from his arm, cast aside like a leaf in a storm. Till they fought on, and at last, with a sound like the cracking of a mountainside, the warden's right leg gave way, and it fell to one knee, its hammer striking the floor with a force that shook dust from the vaulted ceiling above. Even so, it raised its axe for one final blow, determined to fulfill its duty to the bitter end. It was Darn who dealt the telling stroke. Darting beneath the sweeping axe, he drove the point of his heavy spear deep into the guardian's chest, seeking the heart of its hidden mechanism. The spear struck true, and with a final, shuddering groan, the Iron Warden toppled forward, crashing to the ground with a sound like the fall of a great tree. For a long moment, none moved. Each two spent to do more than stand and draw breath into aching lungs. Then Gro straightened his face grim, but alight with fierce triumph, and turned to the dais where the levers waited. "It is done," he said, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. Without delay, Gro, Darren, and Bavor each placed their hands upon the lever marked with the sigil of their clan. At a signal from Gror, they pulled as one, and a deep rumbling filled the hall as the mechanism awoke. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and from beyond the far wall there came the sound of massive gears turning, of stone grating against stone in the grinding protest of hinges untouched for an age. Slowly, ponderously, the great gate of 3 hammers began to open. A shaft of golden light, faint and dusty, but still proud, spilled forth into the chamber, illuminating their battered forms and casting long shadows upon the ancient floor. Beyond the gate lay a broad road paved with stones of many colors, leading into the heart of the mountain, and beyond that, into the lands once held by their scattered kin. The companions stood in awe, their wounds forgotten, their hearts lifted high with the sight of the fulfillment of their quest. Long had the way been shut, but now it lay open once more. A bridge between the broken houses of the dwarves, a road for kin to find kin, for scattered clans to be made whole. Thus did the Gate of Three Hammers yield to the courage, craft, and unity of those who dared the darkness for the sake of their people. But their journey was not yet ended, for though the road lay open, the work of reuniting their kindred would demand more than swords and strength. It would require wisdom, patience, and a hope that no darkness could snuff. Yet, as they stood together in the golden light of the opened gate, the first hammer-stroke of renewal sounded in their hearts, and they knew that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. Long they stood before the threshold, the last echoes of the grinding stone fading into silence. And for a time, no word passed between them, for each heart was filled with awe and a solemn gladness such as words could not rightly capture. The road beyond the gate stretched forth broad and sure, laid by hands that had known no peer in craft, and even through the dust of forgotten ages, the stones gleamed faintly, as if the memory of their makers yet lingered upon them. The light that bathed the way was not of the sun or moon, but rather the glow of ancient lanterns set deep into the walls, fueled by some secret art that had outlasted the ruin of kingdoms and the crumbling of empires. Last Grow turned to the others, and his voice, though worn by battle and hardship, rang clear in the vastness of the chamber. "We have broken the silence of centuries and laid bare the road hidden by our fathers. Yet the gate is but the beginning. Beyond lie the halls of kin, estranged by time and sorrow, and it falls to us to carry this hope forward." Darren nodded, his red beard matted with dust and blood, yet his eyes alight with a fierce joy. "Our work is not finished, nor shall it be easy. Many years of mistrust lie between the houses of our people, and ancient grievances do not fall away with the lifting of a latch." Bor, ever grim and sparing of speech, laid his hand upon the cold stone of the gate, and spoke but one word: "Yet they shall fall." Thus resolved, they passed through the opened way, stepping upon the road their forefathers had laid, each heart bearing the weight of their purpose like a new forged crown. Their footsteps echoed down the long corridor, mingling with the distant whisper of unseen waters and the faint creak of timbers settling after endless years. The road led them into a series of great galleries and halls, each vaster than the last, their walls adorned with carvings of such beauty and grandeur that even the most stoic among them failed to catch in their breath. Here were scenes of the forging of the first hammers, the symbols of each clan wrought by the ancient smiths in the days before the coming of dragons and the wars of men. Here were depictions of the great feasts of unity when Longbeard, Firebeard, and Broadbeam had shared the bounty of the earth in peace, their songs echoing through halls so wide and deep that even the stars seemed near. And here, too, were darker carvings of battles fought against the nameless terrors of the deep, of the sundering of the roads, and of the sorrow that had driven kin from kin. As they passed, each of the company touched these walls with reverent hands, as if to draw strength from the memories etched into the very bones of the mountain. Though the road was long, and though their bodies cried out for rest, they pressed onward, for a new urgency stirred within them. The knowledge that this place must not lie in ruin any longer, that the living must reclaim the legacy of the dead, and that from these forgotten halls a new beginning might yet be forged. At last they came to a place where the road divided, 3 paths branching out into the darkness. Above each archway hung a great banner, though the colors were faded and the fabric torn by time. One bore the mountain and hammer of the Longbeards, another the flame and anvil of the Firebeards, and the third the mountain wall of the Firebeards, and the third the mountain wall of the Broadbeams. There they halted, for the meaning was clear. From this place, each path led to the ancient strongholds of the three clans, and each company would have to go forth to call their own folk back to the road. Grow, standing tall and proud despite the blood that stained his cloak, turned to his companions, his voice steady and grave. "Here our ways must part, if only for a little while. Each of us must walk the road laid for his house, to bring the tidings of the gate reborn, and to summon those willing to set aside old wrongs for the sake of a new unity." Drawing grasped his forearm in the ancient manner of warriors. "We shall meet again beneath the three hammers, and there forge anew the bonds that time and sorrow have broken." Bavor, ever spare of words, not at once, a gesture that in him spoke more deeply than a king's speech. Thus they made ready to part, each taking with him a company of the loyal and the brave, each bearing the memory of the gate's opening as both pledge and command. Supplies were divided, weapons checked, and final words exchanged, brief and solemn. For in the hearts of all was the knowledge that peril yet lurked in the deep places of the world, and that not all who went forth might return. Gror led his company down the left-hand road, the banner of the Longbeards fluttering above him like a ghostly standard. His heart was full, for he knew that in the iron hills his kin waited, proud and stubborn, yet longing in their secret hearts for a sign that the glory of their fathers might be restored. Darin took the center path, his voice raised in a song of old as he marched beneath the flame-marked banner. For the Firebeards of Ered Luon had long been known for their love of craft and kinship, and he would call them back to the forging of a greater brotherhood. Bavor, silent and grim, took the right-hand load, his face a mask of determination as he passed beneath the wall banner of the Broadbeams. His people had dwelt long in isolation, their strongholds hidden in the deepest folds of the Grey Mountains. But he carried with him the weight of history and the hope that even the hardest hearts might yet be moved. Thus they parted, and the halls of the Gate of Three Hammers rang once more with the tread of dwarven feet, not in flight or strife, but in purpose, as it had been in the elder days. The ancient lanterns seemed to burn a little brighter as they passed, as if the very stones rejoiced at their coming. And though each step they took was a step into uncertainty and danger, each heart bore within it the flame of a hope that neither darkness nor distance could quench. For the gate was opened, and the hammers of unity, long silent, were poised to strike once more. The paths that the three companies trod were far from easy, for though the roadways had been made strong by the hands of ancient masters, time had laid its slow and heavy hand upon them, and many places had crumbled or fallen into darkness where no light dared linger. The dwarves pressed onward nevertheless, their torches casting small islands of light in seas of endless shadow, their boots ringing out upon the stones with a sound like distant drums, steady and unyielding. Each leader bore upon his brow the burden of purpose, and in their hearts a fire burned, fed by the memory of what they had already accomplished and by the hope of what might yet be won. Roar and his company, stout and grim, marched along a wide causeway that wound through halls so vast that whole cities might have been hidden in their shadows. Here the walls bore carvings of the Longbeards' ancient kings, their thrones hewn from the living rock, their visages stern and proud. But here too lay signs of battle and ruin, toppled statues, scorched stone, and ancient bones crumbling to dust beneath their feet. Orcs and fouler things had passed this way long ago. But no living foe stirred now, only the cold echoes of forgotten strife. Groa moved among these relics with a bowed head, offering no words, but a silent vow that the days of shame and defeat would not be their ending. Dwarven's road was narrower, winding like a serpent through tunnels whose ceilings dripped with unseen waters, and whose walls pressed close about them. The songs he had begun in high voice faltered here, for the dark seemed to drink the sound from the air, leaving only whispers behind. His companions marched close at his heels, their blades drawn and their shields ever ready. For in these depths, strange creatures were said to linger, born of corruption and darkness beyond the knowledge of the wise. Once they spied eyes gleaming from a cleft in the rock, low and cunning. But when they turned their torches upon the place, they found only silence and the retreating patter of unseen feet. Thus warned, they quickened their pace, trusting in the strength of their arms and the steadfastness of their hearts to see them through. Bavor's path led through a labyrinth of broken chambers and narrow stairways, where the very stone seemed to shift and breathe with the slow life of the earth. Many times his company was forced to double back, seeking another way, where fallen masonry or yawning chasms barred their course. Yet Bavor, grim as the stone from which he sprang, pressed ever onward, reading the lay of the rock as a huntsman reads the tracks of his quarry. In his silence there was a grim certainty, for he knew that his people would not come easily to the call. Long had the Broadbeams withdrawn into their hidden halls, and suspicion was wound into their hearts like veins of iron in the mountain's bones. Yet he carried with him the memory of the gate opened and the dream of hammers striking together once more, and he would not turn aside. Many days passed in this fashion, though in truth the counting of days became a guessing game beneath the earth, where neither sun nor moon gave measure to the hours. Fatigue and hunger gnawed at them, but the dwarfs endured as they ever had, their bodies and wills hardened by ages of toil and hardship. The thought of failure never touched them, for dwarves are slow to despair, and once their hearts are set upon a course, not even the mightiest river nor the steepest mountain can turn them from it. At length, each company drew near to its destination, for we beheld the gleam of torches ahead, and the sound of pickaxes and the murmur of voices reached his ears through the gloom. He had found the outposts of the Longbeards a scattered and weary folk, dwelling among the crags of the iron hills, their numbers few, and their spirits worn thin by long years of isolation and threat. When he stepped into their midst, bearing the marks of battle, and bearing in his hand the token of the 3 hammers, a hush fell over the assembly, and all eyes turned toward him. He spoke then, not with proud boast nor flowery speech, but with the deep, rumbling voice of one who has seen both the greatness and the grief of his people. He told them of the gate found, of the old roads opened, and of the oaths sworn between the clans to forge a new bonds of brotherhood. He spoke of the dangers overcome, of the trials endured, and of the hope that lay now within their grasp, if they but had the courage to seize it. At first the elders muttered among themselves, their faces weary and closed to stone doors. But then a murmur grew among the younger warriors, and soon a cry rose up, a cry for the reawakening of the old glories, for the hammer song and the forg's fire, for the days when the dwarves were one people beneath the mountains. And so Grow knew that his part was done, and with a heart lighter than it had been in many years, he prepared to lead his kin back to the meeting place beneath the gate. Far to the west, Jiren at last reached the halls of the Firebeards, hidden among the high vales and broken peaks of arid Lewin. Their strongholds, though diminished, still bore the marks of ancient wealth, and the dwarves there were quick to heed his call, for their hearts had long hungered for renewed trade, for kinship restored, and for battles fought not merely for survival, but for honor. Broran spoke to them with the fire of his blood, his words ringing against the cold stone like hammer strokes, and their response was swift and eager. Smiths laid down their tools, miners left their veins, warriors tightened the straps of their armor and set their faces eastward. Yet of Bavor's road little can be told, for the Broadbeams were a secretive folk, and their ways deep and silent. What words passed between him and his kin were not recorded in song or story, but this much is known, that when he returned to the meeting place, his company was greater than it had been when he set out, and among them were some of the hardiest and most redoubtable warriors of all the houses of the dwarves. Thus it came to pass that beneath the vaults of the Gate of Three Hammers, the scattered folk of Duran's sons gathered once more, not as strangers or rivals, but as brothers. There in the great hall before the gate, where once the last breath of unity had been sealed away behind stone and silence, now rose again the sound of many voices, of laughter and speech, of hammer upon anvil, and of the ancient songs of forging and homecoming. But their work was not yet finished, and the final forging of unity would demand a hammer blow mightier than any yet struck. Beneath the high and ancient arches of the Gate of Three Hammers, the dwarves gathered, their banners unfurled at last after long years of hiding in silence, and the cavern was filled with a sound not heard in those halls since the elder days, the steady hum and murmur of many voices, of kin calling to kin, of plans spoken and oaths whispered, the deep, rough music of a people stirring from their long slumber. The torches burn brightly now in every sconce, casting warm gold upon the polished walls and sending glimmers along the veins of silver and gem that adorn the stone. And the great floor of the hall, when strewn with dust and ruin, was swept clean beneath the death of many feet. Upon a raised dais at the center of the hall, before the ancient wheel and its carved sockets, the three leaders stood, Gro, Drian, and Bavor, clad in mail and cloak, bearing upon their brows the signs of their houses. And before them, assembled in orderly ranks, stood the hosts of the Longbeards, the Firebeards, and the Broadbeams, each company proud and steadfast, their faces grim, yet shining with the light of hope rekindled. A hush fell as Gro stepped forward, and his voice, deep and sonorous, rose up into the vaulted spaces above, carrying to every ear, filling the vastness with a solemn might. Long have we wandered apart, my brothers. Long have we delved each his own hall, fought each his own war, and mourned each his own losses in bitter solitude. But the darkness grows again in the world beyond, and even here, deep under mountain and stone, its shadow reaches. He paused, and his hand rested lightly upon the haft of his axe, not in threat, but in remembrance of the labors they had endured to come thus far. We are few compared to the days of old. Our enemies are many, but the strength of stone is not in numbers, nor the might of steel in the size of the blade. It is in the forging, in the binding together under hammer and fire, that the greatest things are made. Let us then be bound once more, not by fear nor by necessity alone, but by choice, by blood, and by honor. At these words a murmur rose among the gathered dwarves, low and deep, like the stirring of the earth before the spring. Then Darin, bright-eyed and flame-hearted, stepped forward in his turn, his voice sharp and ringing as a smith's hammer upon the anvil. "The fires of our forges have burned low, but they are not quenched. The songs of our halls have grown faint, but they are not forgotten. Let us strike the hammer upon the anvil once more. Let us forge a bond that shall endure longer than stone, brighter than gold, stronger than the iron bones of the mountain." At his cry, many raised their axes high, and the torches flared brighter, as if the stones themselves hungered for the coming oath. Last came Bavor, slow of speech, but when he spoke, it was as the voice of the deep earth itself, weighty and inexorable. "We are dwarves. We remember, we endure. But the stone that stands alone is worn by wind and broken by water. The mountain endures because every rock, every root, every hidden vein of iron and gold is bound together. So shall we be bound as the mountains are bound." He raised his great hammer then, and with a shout struck the dais before him. A single deep note rang out, pure and clear, reverberating through the cavern, filling every heart with a tremor of ancient pride. At once the herald stepped forward, bearing between them 3 great standards, each bearing the sign of its house, but woven together at the top by a single braided cord of silver and iron. They planted these standards into the sockets of the ancient wheel, and as they did so, the runes upon the stone flared to life, lines of blue and gold fire racing outward from the center to the walls and beyond, as though the very bones of the mountain rejoiced. Then, one by one, each dwarf present came forward, laying his hand upon the standard of his house, and speaking the words of the ancient oath passed down from the days before the first shadows fell upon the world. Stone to stone, fire to fire, hammer to hammer. As we are forged, so shall we stand until the mountains fall into the sea. The sound of those words spoken by many voices together rose and swelled, a wave of power that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. And when the last had spoken, a great cheer went up, a roar of triumph and unity, and it seemed to those who heard it that the darkness recoiled for a time, beaten back by the simple might of hope and fellowship renewed. Gror, Grerin, and Bavor clasped hands upon the dais, and the 3 hammers engraved upon the floor beneath them glowed with a golden light, as though the spirits of their forefathers looked on and smiled. That night there was feasting and song in the halls of the Gate of 3 Hammers, and the sound of laughter echoed from pillar to pillar. The forges were kindled once more, and the anvils sang beneath the blows of many smiths, crafting anew the tools and arms that would be needed for the trials to come. For all knew that their unity must be proved not only by song and oath, but by deed. For the world beyond the mountains was still dark and perilous. Yet for the first time in many lives of men, the dwarves of the Longbeards, Firebeards, and Broadbeams stood as one people, their hearts beating with a single purpose. And so the Gate of 3 Hammers, lost to memory and buried by time, became once more the beating heart of a people awakening from long sorrow. And from its halls a new song would rise, a song of stone and fire, of blood and brotherhood, that even the dark might tremble to hear. In the days that followed the forging of their renewed bond, The dwarves of the three clans set to their labors with a vigor that had not been seen since the elder years, when the mountains rang with the music of countless hammers, and the deep places of the world blazed with the light of many forges. Under the vaulted halls of the Gate of Three Hammers, plans were drawn and councils held. For though the joy of reunion was great, the leaders knew well that their labor was only begun, and that without swift action, even the brightest hope might wither in the encroaching dark. Roar, ever mindful of the practical needs of his people, set his kin to the clearing and repair of the ancient roads that branched out from the Gatehike veins from a great heart. Rubble was cleared, broken arches restored with cunning craft, and fallen stones set right by hands that had not forgotten the arts of their forebears. Great fires were lit in the old braziers that lined the ways, their flames fed by secret stores of oil and tinder, preserved against just such a day. And soon the once-forgotten tunnels blazed with light and life. Darren, whose spirit burned with the bright flame of ambition, turned his thoughts to the forges, and under his direction the smithies were restored, their hearths rekindled with roaring fires that filled the air with the scent of hot iron and the ringing of anvils. Weapons and armor were fashioned new, for though their hearts were set upon peace among their own kind, the dwarves knew well that the world beyond their gates was not so kindly, and that strength of arms would yet be needed to defend the fruits of their labor. Bavor, slow to speech but deep in thought, took upon himself the task of gathering knowledge from the scattered lore masters and scribes who had come with each company. He ordered the ancient records to be brought forth, the dust shaken from their scrolls and tablets, and the songs and histories of their people to be read aloud once more. Thus the wisdom of the elder days was reclaimed, and the memory of who they had been, and who they might yet be, was set firmly once more within their heart. Yet even as they labored, the leaders knew that their unity would be tested, not only by the weight of their own traditions and pride, but by threats from beyond. Though they had heard no news from the lands of men and elves, nor had any shadow crossed their paths in the deep, the darkness that stirred in the east was not idle. And even in the hidden places of Middle-earth, the hand of shadow reached forth to sow ruin. It was on the 21st day after the opening of the gate that a runner came breathless and pale, his mail rent and his helm battered, bearing tidings from the scouts who had been sent forth to watch the ways beyond the mountains. He was brought at once before the three lords, where they sat in council beneath the gleaming standards of their houses. He knelt, struggling to catch his breath, and when he spoke, his words fell upon the gathering like a weight of iron. "My lords," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion and fear, "from the north they come, creatures of darkness and shadow, foul things that crawl from holes of the deep earth, gathering in numbers beyond reckoning. Their banners are black, their arms twisted and cruel, and their purpose is plain. They march for the gate." A silence fell, heavy and grim. Long had the dwarves prepared against such a day, but to hear the tidings spoken aloud, to know that the enemy was no longer a distant fear, but a present doom, sent a shiver even through the hearts of the boldest. Roar rose first, his hand closing about the haft of his axe, and his voice rang with a clear and terrible resolve. "Then let them come. They shall find the halls of our fathers no easy prize. Here stone shall answer stone, and hammer shall meet claw, and the songs of the dwarves shall not end in silence." Draw-In stood beside him, a fierce light in his eyes. "We have forged anew the bonds of our people, and now the fire of our unity shall temper us for the battle to come. We shall not yield one stone, 1 inch of road to the foul things of the dark. Bavor, grim and unflinching, spoke last. We have bound our oaths upon the stone and upon our blood. Let us now bind them upon the anvil of war. The hall erupted then in a roar of voices, as warriors lifted their axes and struck them upon their shields, a sound like thunder rolling through the mountain's heart, fierce and full of might. The banners of the 3 clans seemed to ripple and stir of their own accord, and the very walls of the gate echoed with the living song of defiance. Swiftly they set about their preparations. Watchmen were stationed at every entrance, armed with horn and beacon to give warning of the enemy's approach. Barricades were raised in the narrow ways, cunningly built so that small numbers might hold against many. The smiths labored without rest, turning out spearheads and arrows, reforging old weapons found in forgotten armories, and mending armor that had once gleamed in the days of kings. The miners turned their skills to the crafting of traps and snares, filling the tunnels with pitfalls, deadfalls, and cunning devices that would wound and hinder any who sought to pass. Throughout it all, the 3 lords moved among their people, giving counsel, lending their hands where needed, speaking words of courage, and reminding all who listened of the oath they had sworn. Songs of old were sung once more, not an idle pastime, but as a shield against fear, for the dwarves knew well that a heart filled with song is a heart that fear cannot conquer. And so it was that when the scouts returned with the warning that the enemy was but a day's march from the outer gates, the dwarves stood ready, their axes sharpened, their shields polished, and their spirits tempered as steel under the hammer. As night fell over the mountains and the dark deepened, the dwarfs stood watchful beneath the vaults of the Gate of 3 Hammers, the last and greatest of their ancient strongholds. The torches burned high, the forges blazed with a fierce red glow, and the songs of their fathers echoed once more from the stone. And though the enemy came in shadow and malice, the light of the dwarves shone out into the dark, steadfast and unyielding, a beacon of hope and defiance in a world that had too long lain under the shadow. When the dawn came at last, though no light of sun pierced the stone above, a change was felt in the deep halls of the Gate of 3 Hammers, for the air grew colder, and the ground trembled faintly beneath the tread of many feet. The dwarves stood ready in their ordered ranks, their armor gleaming dully in the torchlight, their axes and hammers held firm in calloused hands. Upon the heights of the inner walls, archers stood in silent watch, their bows strung in their quivers full. The barricades were manned, the traps set, and all who looked upon the host knew that there would be no yielding, no retreat. From the dark tunnels beyond the outer ways came the first sounds of the enemy. A low, muttering growl, the scrape of iron upon stone, the foul breath of countless beasts and cruel things of the deep earth. Then the first of them came into sight. Orcs, black and misshapen, their armor rusted, but their weapons wickedly keen. Goblins, smaller but swifter, their yellow eyes gleaming with malice. And behind them, things of worse nature still, creatures whose names had long since been forgotten by the free peoples of Middle-earth, but whose hatred for all that lived and shone was undiminished. They poured forth in a great tide, howling and shrieking, their numbers beyond counting, a black flood surging against the last bastion of the dwarves. Yet the sons of Duran did not falter. At Gror's command, the first ranks knelt behind their shields, axes poised, while the archers loosed their shafts in a deadly hail that darkened the air. The foremost of the enemy fell by dozens, their bodies tumbling into the pits and snares prepared for them. But still they came on, scrambling over the fallen, heedless of death, driven by a will not their own. The battle was joined with a thunderous crash as the enemy struck the barricades. The dwarves met them with grim determination, axes flashing, hammers rising and falling in unison. Each blow was struck with the strength of ancient oaths, each shield raised with the memory of fathers fallen in forgotten wars. The ground grew slick with blood, the air filled with the cries of the dying and the clash of steel on steel. Yet the lines of the dwarves held firm, a wall of stone against the black tide. A Gruer fought at the forefront, his axe carving great wounds through the ranks of the foe, his voice rising in a deep song of battle that gave heart to those around him. By his side fought Darin, swift and fierce, his hammer a blur as he struck down foes left and right, his laughter ringing out even in the midst of slaughter. And not far behind, silent and relentless, moved Babore, his great mattocks swinging with terrible precision, each blow crushing shield and bone alike. Time lost all meaning in the fury of the battle. Again and again the enemy hurled themselves against the defenders, and again they were thrown back, broken and bleeding. The cunning traps laid by the miners wrought havoc among their ranks. Hidden pits swallowed whole companies. Rockfalls buried scores beneath tons of stone, and cunningly placed oil pits burst into roaring flame, casting an unearthly light across the battle. Yet the dwarves, too, paid a heavy price. Many brave warriors fell beneath the blades of the foe, their blood soaking into the ancient stones. Thalin the singer was struck down while rallying the left flank, his voice silenced mid-song. Owen the miner fell defending a breach in the barricade, his last blow shattering the skull of the chieftain who led the assault. Urz, the shield maiden, fought like a lioness until she was borne down by sheer numbers, and though her body was found at the last, ringed with the slain, her loss was keenly felt. Still the dwarves would not yield. The memory of the gate's opening burned in their hearts, the hope of a new age forged with blood and iron, and they fought with a fury that even the darkest creatures could not withstand. At last, after what seemed an age of unbroken struggle, a great horn sounded from the darkness beyond the enemy lines, a deep, mournful sound, like the groaning of the earth itself. The enemy faltered, then began to fall back, dragging their wounded with them, their dead left behind in heaps. The dwarves did not pursue, for they knew that prudence was the better part of victory, and they held their ground, breathing heavily, leaning on their weapons, their faces grim but triumphant, when it became clear that the enemy had truly withdrawn. A great shout rose from the dwarves, echoing from pillar to pillar, a cry of victory and defiance that shook the very stones of the mountain. The banners of the three clans were raised high once more, and though many had fallen, the survivors stood together, shoulder to shoulder, their hearts bound by the blood they had shed and the hope they had defended. In the days that followed, they tended to the wounded, honored the dead, and repaired the damage done to the halls and the roads. Songs were sung of the fallen heroes, and their names were carved into the walls of the gate to stand forever as a testament to their valor. The fires of the forges burned brighter than ever, and the halls rang with new songs and the laughter of a people reborn. The Gate of Three Hammers, once lost to time and sorrow, had been reclaimed not only in stone and craft, but in the living hearts of those who had dared to hope and to fight and to forge anew the brotherhood of the dwarves. And though the world beyond the mountains remained dark and uncertain, within the halls of the gate, the fires of unity and courage burned ever brighter, a beacon to all who would seek the strength to stand against the gathering night. Thus ended the tale of the Gate of Three Hammers, a tale of courage, craft, and the enduring strength of a people who, though broken by time and sorrow, rose once more to stand together beneath the mountain, as they had in the elder days, when the world was young and full of wonder.